These compilations are made possible in part by Audible. For every person to sign up using the link below, you directly help support the channel. I love literature and stories, but don't always have the time to sit and read a book, so Audible solves that problem for me by providing a vast selection of audio content for me to listen to at any time. Let me know how you use Audible most in the comments, along with any book suggestions that you think I might enjoy. Thank you again for supporting the channel, and enjoy the video.
All right, so there's a few things that I want to be able to say, and I'll say at the beginning of all of my videos that are on nonverbal communication. It is at best 70% accurate. There is definitely a talent to reading it. It is not a complete science as something like psychology is. It is not quite a pseudoscience. It is a mixture in between. So if you watch this, this isn't absolute truth. This is an educated conclusion based off of given facts. I have received requests to be able to do Amber Heard's deposition from 2016, and this is the time that I'm able to do it. If you would like to be able to know more about what caused this to all come to fruition, feel free to research it yourself. I am here to look at the body language of things. Now, I spent a good amount of time actually, a good couple days trying to just establish a nonverbal baseline from Amber herself so that I can better get a read on her during this deposition, because establishing a baseline or where a person's nonverbal communication is at rest is crucial to be able to understand where their points of friction or their positive or negative spikes are in their baseline. So I'm going to go ahead and show you part of one video that allows you to kind of see where that baseline lies so we can understand kind of who we're dealing with. And then we're going to go and unpack all of her stuff. We're also going to look at Johnny Depp's stuff. And then we're going to look at some footage of her and Johnny Depp together to be able to see how this relationship really stands. And this will all paint us a pretty good picture as to what is going on, the truth behind the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp snafu. Let's go ahead and watch this video.
No one in my family really ever left Texas. My parents in school once were called in and they asked them about me being such an artist and, can I maybe channel that into like more productive things like, math or science or something. And my parents were like, it was this like almost apologetic attitude, like, we don't know where she gets.
Okay, so this is actually a fairly, just for your ability to see it, I've watched far more hours on her than I would ever care to admit to be able to establish this baseline. But that little blip there allows you to see some very important things that need to be established while reviewing her body language. She stumbles over her words a fair bit in most situations, actually. She always processes, so that's something that we need to keep in mind as we continue to do a read. She also looks around a fair bit, so that is something that we also need to keep in mind. Her eyes are constantly wandering around. And then along with that, if you look at her eyes specifically, they're not overtly expressive in and of themselves. They maintain this almost hooded expression most of the time. That's just something that is specific to her and how her face and her nonverbal communication reveals itself. Now, I do want to say that I'm not going to watch the entire deposition on here, so I'm going to touch on various areas of it. If this is a popular enough video, I might revisit it and maybe do the rest of it or go more in depth, but for sake of viewability for you, I am going to keep this under 30 minutes long. There's a lot to unpack. We're going to go ahead and start and just go.
6:18 p.m. and we're back home.
And just a clarification, we're not going to invoke the Fifth Amendment privilege, so you can re-ask that question if you like.
Which question?
Did you commit domestic violence against Johnny Depp?
Anytime prior to May 22nd, 2016, did you ever commit an act of domestic violence against Johnny Depp?
Calls for a legal conclusion and irrelevant, but go ahead.
Do you understand what I'm asking you?
No.
No?
Yes, I understand what you're asking.
Oh my God. Alrighty, right off the bat. Okay, so you can see she's doing her thing where her eyes are darting all over the room, but it seems a little bit more excessive as soon as the question comes in. And this is actually common in people who don't want to be in a situation that they're in. This could be due to boredom, this could be due to guilt, this could be due to not wanting to be caught for something. When you are looking around a room a lot while being spoken to, that shows a lack of interest in what's going on. So Amber is showing quite clearly with her nonverbal communication that she doesn't want to be there. She has no interest in being there. Why that is another issue altogether. But her nonverbal communication is expressing that clearly. Now, she also does a thing where there's already a nonverbal misalignment, and a fairly strong one. It has to do with the nodding of the head while saying no. This is not always a guaranteed thing. In fact, a lot of the times people will shake their head while saying a positive thing or nod their head while saying a negative thing. But in this situation, she nods in affirmation, legitimately nods like, yeah, but then actually says no afterwards. It's two distinct communication devices that are used one right after the other rather than at the same time, and they're exactly misaligned. And this is not a good tick for Amber because it's already setting up this idea of not being able to really fully believe or trust what she's going to be saying, but it's not concrete, so we still have to go from here. Let's keep watching.
And prior to May 21,
I don't know why she does that lip lick thing. Some people say it's a soothing gesture. She was also just eating food, which you'll see that more in this deposition, which is so annoying, but it's not enough for it to really sway my reading on what she is as far as her honesty goes. But let's go ahead and keep watching from here.
2016 or May 22, 2016, is it your testimony that you never committed any act of what would be considered domestic violence against Mr. Depp?
Calls for legal conclusion and irrelevant to these proceedings.
I did my best to defend myself and not get seriously hurt or be a doormat to whom this happens to.
Okay, right off the bat, this question is asked and she starts shrugging, which is an indicator of insecurity, or at least not being certain about what is being said. And then along with that, she does some placating, self-soothing gestures and blocking gestures and shaking her head. It's a very massive cluster spike from what we've seen in her baseline, which is usually fairly constant, to indicate that she's really, really not comfortable with that question here. Now, legally, it's not applicable, but non-verbally, it's a very telling question, and her reaction to it is extremely telling. So far, this is 2 strikes already against Amber, and we're literally a minute into this video. This is not a good thing for Amber. Let's keep watching.
Isn't it true that you had previously told Johnny Depp that you had hit him?
I'm going to object. It's a different question. It's vague and ambiguous, vague as to time.
Many times when we fought, well, not many times.
Alright, so there's a thing about the mouth shrugs, which I brought this up often in Shane's video. Generically speaking, mouth shrug indicates insecurity or uncertainty about what is being said. I think that is the case here. I'm not certain that that is the case here, but I think that is the case here. She flashes a couple of them, and then she starts stumbling all over her words, which there's 2 reasons that that could be. Either one, she's working to recollect something, or alternatively, she's working to come up with a story about something. Let's keep watching this because this is a pattern and you'll see it here.
He hit me for a very long time before I ever
I'm going to
picked up
check
my
as
arms.
non-responsive and move to strike. Ms. Hurd, I'd like you to listen to what I'm about to play. Would you do that?
Don't eat. Just real quick, why is she eating?
Just like, why?
It's not sustenance. They're snacky foods. And there are theories that are saying that she was given this food to be able to buy herself time so that in issues where she has a difficult question, she could be eating food to be able to come up with an answer. It does present itself in this video. But it's just so frustrating to me that that's how little she cares about what's going on. I don't think that a person who is on trial for alleged assault accusations involved in a relationship would just be casually snacking and acting like she's so unenthused about what's going on. If she's actually the victim, why is she not more passionate about it? This is not a good indicator for Amber being the victim. It's a very good indicator for her being an abuser. But let's keep watching this. They're going to start playing some audio as well. And let's go.
I don't even know if I said, I might have said, like, what the, you know, whatever, because I just been hit in the head. so sorry. I did not. I'm sorry.
And then I stood up.
Do you recognize the voices on that tape?
Mm-hmm.
And who are the people on that tape?
It's Johnny and I.
Okay.
Important thing. She talked with her mouth full there, right? She just answered the question because it's a no-doubt question. Who's in it? It's Johnny and I. And she said that through a mouthful of food. Later on, when there's a more difficult question and she has food in her mouth, suddenly she's not comfortable talking with food in her mouth. Suspicious. Let's keep watching.
I was trying to escape from a room where Johnny was attacking me. And in order to escape, I was trying to get onto the other side of the door, attempting to close the door, and he was attempting to get in despite my attempts to try and escape an assault.
Isn't it true that on this tape that was just played,
So there was a lot of condescension in her voice during that. This could be due to the fact that she may have been asked this question often. And then afterwards, she shakes her head no, and this is either in disgust or it's in a nonverbal misalignment saying, like, I don't believe at all what I just said, or this is false, something along those lines. However, during this time as a nonverbal analyst, I would advise to really push on points of these responses because they're not genuine. There's something fishy going on here, and it needs to be pushed. It needs to be tested to find out if it's actually genuine or not. But let's keep watching.
did you just tell Johnny Depp in that recording that I remember hitting you as a response to the door thing?
Yes, as he was trying to get into the door, into the room, I was trying to escape in. He pushed the door into me, and I was trying to hit him by getting him out of the door to stay in the room.
And you told
She's like, duh. What? If this was any other situation, would you ever believe that sort of explanation as to what happened? Or her response to hard evidence of her vocally saying that she hit Johnny is this weird, like...
No. Yes, but, well, it was because he was, the door was there, and I hit him to get out of the... Duh.
I'm like, what? What? Want to rehearse that again and maybe bring it back out to me? Whatever. All right, let's keep watching.
Did you tell Johnny Depp at that time you were speaking to him that you were really sorry for hitting him with the door, hitting him?
I think in that recording I made it very clear that I was sorry that the door hit him while he was trying to get into the room I was escaping, or attempting to escape into.
Okay. Oh my God. I'm getting frustrated by her lack of concern for this situation. And now she's doing a very obvious, I have no interest in being here tell. This leaning of your head on your hand like that. This is classic. I am bored. I have no interest. It's a very, very clear nonverbal tell. If your significant other is doing this while you're talking to them, or your friend or your boss or anybody, they're done listening to you. They don't care to be there. So she's communicating that extremely clearly, which is just so baffling to me if she's really a victim. Why is she so uninterested in being there if she's the victim? But we're going to go ahead and keep watching, and then we'll start looking at like Johnny Depp stuff as well.
So you told him in that excerpt that you hit him with the door but did not intend to hit him, correct?
The recording speaks for itself.
Did you say that?
I said whatever I said in that recording. I
Okay.
don't,
She just proved that she wasn't listening. Once again, an indicator that she doesn't care to be there. Not really an indicator of wanting to prove her innocence. Really more of an indicator of wanting to not be in a courtroom situation that might prove her guilt. I'm really not impressed with this. For the sake of study, we're going to continue to beat this dead horse. Let's go.
So on the tape, you tell Johnny Depp that you did mean to hit him.
Objection. That's argumentative, and it misstates what the recording was.
and it also misrepresents what actually happened, which is him trying to get into a room I'm trying to keep him out of. And then he runs the door over my toes, trying to get into the room. I try to push him out of it, which is what the hit is referred to. And Johnny, whenever he was injured or touched, it always referred to it in these ways of punching or clocked or whatever. And whether you didn't discuss it with him or not, the last thing you do.
A lot of defensive gestures there. People do that to defend or ward off or prevent something from hitting home. Everybody does it in some form or another. She's doing it here because I think she realized that she probably slipped up a little bit verbally. I bet you her lawyer's like, oh my God, stop. Just kill it there. Let's go.
In talking to him afterwards or trying to reconcile with him is to get into what the definition of those words mean to him.
Just say what
So
happened.
I never even addressed it. He would, if he was ever pushed, it was a cold. He called it a cold clock. I mean, it was just very dramatic.
Isn't it true, Ms. Heard, that in September of 2015, you punched Johnny Depp in the face with a closed fist?
Wow. What a pause. And it's interesting because we saw earlier that she's comfortable talking with her mouth full, but now she's not. What an interesting thing. Now she doesn't want to talk with her mouth full. Almost like there's a hard question and she has to think of a good response. And it's a poorly delivered response. She had all that time to think and it's still shit. Let's watch.
I hit Johnny one time when he... Sorry, I'll wait.
No, you answer the question. Please stop whispering because it's distracting over here.
It's your team.
No, I was referring
No,
to
these
this,
two.
actually.
I can't hear them. I hear them. So please answer the question.
I can't answer. There was whispering. There was whispering in the room and I can't answer when they're whispering. Fuck off. Sorry.
Yes or no, did you ever
No.
punch Johnny Depp with a closed fist in the history of your relationship with Johnny?
Answer it however you feel you wish to.
One time, Johnny was hitting me, and he was hitting me hard and repeatedly, and I was screaming. Security walks in, and they don't do anything about it. And he makes this motion when Jerry Judge yells "boss," or Sean, I can't remember who it was, and all we had was a little bit of separation, and my sister runs down the stairs. We're on a landing in between two flights of stairs.
Ms. Heard, I must interrupt you,
You can't.
because
You
I've
can't.
asked you a yes
Then
or no question.
withdraw your question then because
Ms.
she's
Heard,
answering.
prior to today's date, have you ever hit Johnny Depp?
Answer it however you wish. You've already asked and she's already answered and you interrupt.
Ooh. Okay, this is a frustrating thing for me. The lawyer asked, Amber didn't answer, and then her lawyer stepped in and complained for a little bit, and then the lawyer asked again, and Amber answered a different question, and then the lawyer asked again. This is 3 times of the same question, and then her lawyer bitched again saying that she already answered that question. This is not good news for Amber. But let's go ahead and keep watching.
Ms. Heard, have you ever hit Johnny Depp prior to today?
Objection, Vegas to time.
Hey, everyone on this side of the room, please.
Objection 352. It's not relevant to this domestic violence proceeding.
Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Answer it however you want to, including the way you were just.
I'm asking for a yes or no answer.
You don't have to answer it the way she wants you to answer it.
He was about to push my sister down the stairs. She was attempting to break us up. I am protective over my baby sister. When he laid hands on her, I don't know what I did, but I know I jumped in between the actions that I saw could lead to a fatal injury to my sister. She was standing on the top of a flight of stairs, and she has never hurt anyone in her life, and she does not deserve to be pushed down the flight of stairs. And it looked like she was about to be. And I would have done what anybody who has a child or a sister would have done. I acted defensively in her life. I saw her standing on top of a flight of stairs and trying to interrupt a fight in between him and I. I don't know what part of my body I put in between me and him and her. But I would have done anything. I would have done anything to prevent her from being pushed down a flight of stairs.
Okay, interesting. In my opinion, that wasn't the case. Now, there's more footage to this, and I thought that it was on this specific tape, but apparently not. There's other parts of her recollecting some abuse from Johnny, and it's terribly delivered. There's way too much thinking. There's incongruencies in the delivery, the story, everything, to where it's been pretty well shown that it's not true. So we're actually going to go ahead and move on to Johnny Depp's side of things so we could see kind of what his ordeal is, and then we're going to look at perhaps some of them together so we can see what that relationship dynamic really is like.
Basically, I had a pretty nasty injury.
Interesting here. Johnny does a lot of hesitations in his recalling of things, his recollection of things, which this could be, once again, because he's trying to recall or because he's trying to make up. Something that a lot of people have noticed, and I am noticing as well, which doesn't make sense. Either one, it's the duper's delight, or it's him trying to find a way to lighten a not very lighthearted story, is he does this little half smirk. Only part of his mouth is raised. It doesn't reach his eyes. It's not a genuine feeling, so I don't think it's duper's delight. It's probably more a forced emotion, but he does it a couple times. Let's go ahead and continue watching this.
That I actually, I had to protect her at the time. And so I said that it was caught in the door, one of these huge accordion doors at this house. That wasn't the case at all. She smashed, she threw a vodka bottle at me. And my hand was resting on the marble of the bar like that. And the first bottle went just past my ear. And the second one was a larger bottle, and she threw it from about this distance. And it smashed into the bar, which and this finger, who I now call Little Richard, was the tip of the finger was severed.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and stop his here because all the way throughout it, his body language is pretty genuine from what I can tell. He's a very soft-spoken person, and this is actually common across all of his interviews, how he interacts with people. He's just very soft-spoken, a lot more mellow. So during this, his nonverbal communication stays constant to his baseline. The only part is that duper's delight that might show up, or forced positivity in a negative situation, which I think is more plausible. Now, something that's interesting verbally, and these are the words that are being said in his recollection of things as opposed to Amber's recollection of things, is that during his recollections, he gives the crucial details to the story to be able to convey what happened, which is a sign of honesty. You communicate what needs to be communicated in order to understand what is happening. Amber, on the other hand, does something which a lot of deceitful people will do, in that she adds tons of extraneous details that don't need to be in there, which people would assume would be, oh, it's because she remembers it, it's so vivid. But that's not what actually happens. And we're going to go ahead and watch a clip of them together at some event, and you can see the body language of Amber as opposed to Johnny, and how they communicate, and the submissive gestures and body language from Johnny towards Amber, and how she definitely seems to be in control of that relationship in an unhealthy way.
よろしくお願いします。まず久々の日本についての感想を聞かせてください。
So you'll watch Johnny here. He looks at the ground a lot, which is a show of a lack of confidence. And this is also partially because he's trying to hear in a very loud area. But you can also see Amber's body language in contrast. He does a lot of looking down. She does a lot of high posture, very in command. And she does this like condescending look at Johnny. And it really shows the power struggle that's going on here, to where Johnny is just, he's not in a healthy relationship, and Amber is not a good partner. Let's keep watching this real quick.
I mean, for me, it's always a pleasure. The only problem I ever have here is that I don't get to spend enough time here. Yeah. My girl and I are talking about taking the trip to the country. You know, really the the outskirts, the country, the very native cultural experience. So we wanted to do that someday.
ね、とにかくね、私日本大好きで、本当に嬉しいんですけど、いつも時間が足りなくて。
So you can see it again there. He does a look up at her. She looks down at him. This is an indicator of the state of their relationship. I'm not going to watch the rest of this because it's pretty repetitive and this is a long enough video. But that's where their body language lies. For those of you who have not watched the other videos in this small series that we have been doing here, I suggest you go and check those out for a little bit more context. We will be relying on some of the information found in those videos during this video as well, so please keep that in mind. Now, what we're going to be watching here is Depp's recollection of a certain instance that him and Amber had, and it can be difficult to listen to for some people, so just be aware of that. I have done what I can to try to maintain community guidelines as best as I can, but it is still what it is. So that's enough of that. Let's go ahead and dive in.
How did it come to be that your finger became injured?
There was at one point where I'd stayed in one of the, I'm sitting on a bathroom floor, the door locked, she's banging away, screaming, blah, 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 and then suddenly she stopped.
Okay. I'm going to make a couple notes about how Johnny delivers dialogue. He has this halting tone throughout all of his dialogue. It is consistent here as well. So that does lead me to believe that this is still resting within his normal baseline. That also being said, he is a trained on-screen talent, so that does kind of have to be thrown into question in general. How much is he actually controlling? There are some psychological factors that kind of differentiate being an actor and trying to pull off a lie or a guise on stand, but it is still something to consider. So along with that, we've heard him switch in between tenses here about how he was sitting on the floor, and he does a smile there as well, which we found in the first video in the series that is something that Depp does in regards to some of the more dark history that he has. It's that smiling response. Many of you were able to relate in the comments as well. So we see that popping up there in regards to him sitting there on the floor. Then he switches tense and saying that she's banging on the door and switches tense again. So this tense switching might be an indicator of deceit. Doubtful here due to the narrative that he's painting here. It's very storybook-esque, so it has that tense change in there, which adds a little bit of flair. But it is still something to make note of. Let's continue.
And I could hear her walk away. And I left the place, the room that I was hiding in, or not hiding, locked myself into. And I went downstairs in the house. Downstairs in the house.
So when he's talking about that room that he left, he has some disgust creep into his face. And then he also says, not hiding, I locked myself into. So there's something around that instance that I would be led to believe that he probably feels disgust on. And it seems to be centered around his own activity. That leaving or that hiding somewhere in there, he has a level of disgust, and the only thing that's being talked about there was his own actions. I'm curious to know what that would be, but that would just be more a peek into Depp's mind rather than something that's applicable to this. So let's continue.
As soon as you walk in the house, you can go upstairs or downstairs. Downstairs, there was a sort of a rec area, pool table and such, and there was a bar.
I'm going to go ahead and pause that here because he has done some important things. First, while he's talking about the spatial aspects of the location, he is using spatial gestures as well. This encourages me to believe that he's talking authentically. He's being authentic here in that he is remembering spatially as well. Is that a guaranteed? Absolutely not, but it does push me towards his authenticity. Now, what he also does during that time is he does a quick scan of the room to see if everybody's understanding what he's saying about the location of things and how it's described, making sure that everybody's following along with. This is something that comes naturally to people, and it's to make sure that what you are conveying is being clearly presented. That's important to note because that specific patterning actually shows up in Amber Heard's entire testimony as she scans the room repeatedly to see if her emotions are landing or falling appropriately on the people around. This is a red flag because that means that she's so focused on her own display and how it's being received, checking in on the faces of the people around, especially with the jury, that
you get the feeling that she's not actually feeling those emotions, which then also comes out in that area of desynchronization, feeling like they're acting through some sort of petroleum jelly, thick substance kind of thing. So when we see that coming up there, it makes sense in Johnny Depp's case. It doesn't make as much sense in Amber Heard's case. Johnny Depp's describing an area, and Heard is trying to portray an emotion, but they're both trying to feed off the audience. That's fascinating. Now we're going to watch Johnny start to get into the actual meat of the matter.
And I was a mess. I was a wreck. I was shaking, and I just didn't understand why all this was happening. So I went behind the bar. I grabbed a bottle of vodka that was there and a shot glass and sat at the bar. She was nowhere around. And I poured myself 2 or 3 stiff shots of the vodka. First taste of alcohol I'd had in a long time. And then she came down to the bar and found me there. And of course started screaming, "Oh, you're drinking again, the monster," and all that.
Okay, so I'm still paying attention to where he's looking, when he's looking, how he's emoting during those times, and kind of what that pushes me to believe. So during the times that he's talking about his emotional state or something that might be a little bit more difficult, he seems to hone in into this space, this nebulous space, which is very common to see a person recollect in that way. So as he's doing that, he's kind of focused into that space, and then you can see him pop out of it a bit. Even non-verbally, he kind of shifts a bit, and he looks up and he talks about pouring himself a stiff couple of drinks, and then he starts to hone back in again once it starts to get to the emotional side of things. So seeing that come in, that does lead me to believe that he is emoting genuinely, authentically in those areas. So the consternation that we're seeing, that is genuine consternation, at least as backed up by this small cluster. And along with that, we see this disgust and such come into his face when he starts talking about Heard's reactions towards him. That seems to be a little bit amplified, but that does also make sense with what he's saying as well. So anyways, long story short, right now he is still being authentic from what I can tell. Let's continue forward.
So she walked up to me and reached and grabbed the bottle of vodka, and then just kind of stood back and then hurled it at me, and it just went right past my head and smashed behind me.
During this time, all of his illustrators are accurate to how the flow of things would go. He hasn't shown any mix-ups between hands or sides or anything that might indicate that he tried to make it up. Now, like I said, he's an actor, so he could have maybe rehearsed this, but we see quite clearly that just because you are an actor doesn't mean that you can be good at lying on a stand. So in this area, I feel like he is still being genuine and authentic, not only by the spatial illustrators, but by the fact that he has maintained his synchronization all the way throughout. Let's continue watching.
So I stood up and I walked behind the bar, and there was a larger bottle of vodka, the kind with the handle, on it. I grabbed that and I went and I sat in my seat again.
So this is an odd area of Depp's nonverbal communication where he just goes and continues doing more of a gesture than needs to be there, and that is something that has popped up in his past before. He has odd quirks about his nonverbal communication that come up, and there are a number of reasons for that, but because we have seen them pre-existing before and have established that they are part of his baseline, we know that it's not an indicator of possible deceit or desynchronization here. So that is important to note. But along with that, he is still using very, very prevalent illustrators. I'm wondering if he was coached to continue to do so or to push to do so, because it's very, very verbose. That is interesting to me, but let's continue.
I opened the bottle and I poured myself a shot, drank it. Miss Heard was flinging insults left, right, and center, and she then grabbed that bottle and threw that at me. And the way that the bar was situated and where Miss Heard was. So if I could show you, so if this is the bar where the glass.
Pause it here. Obviously, we saw a whole blip there of Amber, and she remained very, very still the entire time. Very astutely blank expression. All that it's letting us know is that she's being very, very guarded with her emotions. It makes sense. So let's continue.
And the bottles, if this was the bar and I was sitting here like this, she would grab the bottle and she would go there. She went there. And so I was leaning like this in the chair, looking at her. First bottle went, then got the other bottle, shot. Takes the second bottle, which is the larger one. I'm in this position again, and my hand is on the edge of the bar, like that, you know, leaning over, the fingers like that, and she threw the large bottle, and it made contact and shattered everywhere. And I honestly didn't feel the pain.
Okay, so during this entire time of his recollection, everything has maintained spatial consistency while he's speaking of it. And his ability to remember spatial memories like this encourages me to believe that he is still being authentic. Let's continue watching.
At first at all, I felt no pain whatsoever. What I felt was, I felt heat. I felt heat, and I felt as if something were dripping down my hand, you know. And then I looked down and realized that the tip of my finger had been severed, and I was looking directly at my bones sticking out, and the meaty portion of the inside of your finger, and blood was just pouring out.
So we can see again as he's talking about these fairly difficult instances in his past, we see the small smile slip in there in response to the morbid nature of his conversation, and that does, as we said, fit with his baseline that has come up repeatedly. It's not an area of deceit, aka he's not doing something like Duper's Delight or along those lines. So fascinating to see it come up through here. As he's continuing to recollect this, he's still maintaining this look into space as he's remembering everything and gesturing spatially. These all still push me to believe that he's being authentic during his recollection of this.
And at that point, I think that I went into some sort of, I don't know what a nervous breakdown feels like, but that's probably the closest that I've ever been.
So all that I can note there on Heard's face is that she does have a little bit more activity in the corners of her nose, in the area of perhaps disgust. It could be related to emotion as well. If somebody starts to possibly cry, they will develop a stiff upper lip. Maybe that's what's showing up there. It doesn't seem quite like it because the action is resting a little higher here instead of being a freezing of this area. So with that in mind, if that's disgust coming through, that would line up as well. But since it is constant, it doesn't waver much, I'm not going to say for sure they're holding disgust right there. But it is something that pops up, so optimistically, in the courtroom itself, we would be able to continue watching her to see how the contextual body language lines up with what we're seeing at that time. Let's continue.
Nothing made sense. And I knew in my mind and in my heart, this is This is not life. This is not life. No one should have to go through this.
Which finger was cut, Mr. Depp?
It's the middle. It's the funny-looking one. It's the middle finger here. You can see you can see all the sort of from the initial wound. All these bones up here were crushed, and it looked like Vesuvius, you know. And so this part of my finger now is so that because of not having use of the tip here, this is basically arthritis that kicks into the joint once that upper part of the finger is mangled.
So is that the right middle finger?
Right middle, yes.
And is that your dominant hand?
Yes, it is, yes.
Mr. Depp, after...
That was a lot of information that was kind of packed into a fairly simplistic question. But in this area, since it's immediately backed up with physical evidence that's showing that he's not really lying about anything, then we could see that that would be maybe perhaps related to nerves. There could be a reason that he gave that extra amount of information. If we did not have that physical thing that showed that he was legitimately being honest in that area, then you would want to ask questions, because packing and packing and packing can mean nervousness. And if you're nervous, why? Why are you nervous in that question? So with that would have been a red flag. Since he has the evidence, then it's not a red flag, so we'll have to continue watching.
Miss Heard threw the vodka bottle at you and severed your finger. What, if anything, did she say when she saw the injury?
I don't recall anything, but just it was almost like white noise, just someone yelling. It was just a high-pitched, constant attack of insults. It was just jumbled words to me in a very...
Okay, so here I'm interested. As he's continuing to try to remember, he goes through a very, very overt remembering expression. The cluster, the lowering and drawing together of the eyebrows, the narrowing of the eyes, all of it showing this concentration as he's working mentally to try to access the auditory of that time. And as he's talking about the white noise, it just sounds like perhaps somebody who has had several shots of alcohol and then went through a fairly traumatic event might be feeling some symptoms of shock. But then he starts to say with the insults and everything like that, that part sticks out to me as interesting because that doesn't fit with everything else. He was saying it was white noise. Now he's saying with the insults and everything. And then he continues to try to wrap it up by this jumbled, chaotic mess. So during that time, there's that possibility that he's trying to hang a little bit more responsibility or a little bit more dirt on Heard by saying in the insults. But I don't really have enough evidence to actually say that. So it's something that I have to just keep my eye on and continue forward with.
In a very high frequency, and I was in a bit of shock, you know.
Mr. Depp, I'd like to show you a picture. If we could please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 145. Mr. Depp, what is this a picture of?
That is, that's me in the emergency room. I see a detail that I'd forgotten, which is the Ms. Heard had taken my cigarette from the ashtray and stomped it out in my face here.
Could you mark on the screen where you see that?
It's right above that green dot.
And do you know who took this picture?
I do not know.
Can we please publish this to the jury?
Do you want me to enter into evidence?
Yes, please.
Any objection? No, Your Honor. All right, 145 in evidence. You can publish to the jury.
And so, Mr. Depp, now that the jury can see the photograph, can you again explain what that green dot is identifying?
Just above the...
Real quick here, as he was talking about that instance, again, we saw the smirk in regards to a traumatic event in his past, still fitting on brand. Along with that, we're seeing here physical evidence of what he's saying. So far, synchronization and accurate spatial memory, those do still push me to believe he's authentic. Let's continue watching the rest of this.
Well, just above the green dot is a wound from Ms. Heard taking my cigarette, and this is after the finger had gone away, and she stubbed it out in my face and on my cheek.
If we could please pull up Plaintiff's Exhibit 343. And for the record, this is an audio recording. It's quite lengthy, so we intend to play certain portions of it.
At least 5 bathrooms, 2 bedrooms. There were rounds, man, and like it's too scary. The rest was important. All I'm saying is you can't have a solution if the argument just keeps mounting. I go to the bathroom, sit on the floor. Bam, you come. I come out. Fight, crazy, escalated. I go straight down to another bathroom, my bedroom. No. You kept coming to get me. Dude, I'm not going to close. Possum. That's one does not make it here. That's not mean you come out the door. Just because it's not mean you come out the door. I'm not saying you're putting words in my mouth and being not secretary. No, you're trying to justify how you don't come to the door. I'm justifying how you seem to think that there's hours and you don't fight you. And you're justifying that. Okay, cool. So I'm not going to. I said you. Those shots just happened. You told me that. No, you said you not punch. You're not punched. No, you get punched. Not yet. Right, like this. I'm not punch you. I'm not deck you. I'm hitting you. I don't know what promotion. My actual hands was. But you're fine. I'm not hurt you. I'm not punch you. I'm hitting you. How am I supposed to do this? I'm not saying you. That's different. Me and you. You are such a baby. Oh, please. I did sorry. Yes, you did the right thing. The big thing. You're admirable.
So, pausing it here, obviously I cut a portion of this. There's an entire segment where there's a discussion between Amber and Johnny, and it can be a triggering portion, so I wanted to go ahead and take that off of YouTube, keep it from being demonetized, and put it over on Patreon. If you do want to see it, it's at the lowest tier. I think it's $1 or something like that, and you can go and watch that and see it there. During that time, we hear a lot of psychological banter between Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, as Johnny is talking about these instances where he's trying to avoid a confrontation, and oftentimes a physical confrontation. And then at the very, very end, it wraps up with Amber Heard verbatim saying, "I did not punch you, I hit you. It doesn't matter what my hand shape was like. You're not that hurt. You're fine." Calling him a baby, so on and so forth. It is interesting that in this defamation trial, we have audio evidence of Amber herself confirming that she's physically abusive. But let's continue watching this. We'll see how the rest of this plays out.
Mr. Depp, could you please explain to the jury what they just heard on those audio recordings?
What was just played on the audio recordings was...
Okay, so when he's spoken to initially, Depp snapped to attention. He was obviously living in a moment or remembering something along those lines, that sharp shift there. And then we hear his voice has a little bit of difficulty coming in, so we could reasonably say that he was feeling an emotion at that time as well. According to his face, it would be consternation, perhaps anger, perhaps anguish, pain, fear, a variety in that area with the eyebrows and eyes.
And now, as he's starting to speak, we're seeing a very small frame from him. And this is not a verbose or dominating position. It's very small. And then it cuts to Amber, and we see that Amber has her chin raised a bit, looking almost perhaps defiantly until she looks down and around to the sides. Perhaps there's an indicator that says, oh, this camera is now live. I'm not sure why that look down into the side happened to happen so quickly after a camera switched to Heard, but that small point of defiance that was there before, that chin raised, this is, I'm not threatened, I'm in control, and try me. So, with that being there as well, I find that interesting. For her to be having this defiance in relation to what we just heard is also interesting. Regardless, let's continue watching and then we'll wrap up.
Was very much the tone and the aggression and the attitude and the need for a fight from Ms. Heard. That was, I don't know if that was some need for attention, but I don't. That was a sound that I had gotten very used to.
Says that need for attention. She does a little bit of a slower blink. You see her eyes move around a bit. That would be just a small level of agitation from Heard in regards to Depp calling out perhaps some childish behavior on her part. Just find that interesting that that still slips through despite the very astutely blank face that she is attempting to keep. Let's continue.
The squabbling, the you know, the raising of the voice to essentially excommunicate anything that I had to say about the situation.
Okay, so we'll go ahead and stop that here. Like I said, there is a lot more to this case. I have been able to get a little bit faster internet, working on faster still, but I should be able to start picking up more and more. There have been some interesting things that have been tagged on in social media in regards to this. So I think my best suggestion for y'all is to buckle up. Elaine has done multiple interviews and they all have extremely similar answers to the questions given, which we would expect, but it also lets us know that it is very rehearsed. So that's just going to add muddiness to the situation. So I've went through and I've looked at their nonverbal communication throughout the trial and these interviews to be able to establish somewhat of a loose baseline. Now, today we will be going through and seeing what they feel. All right, let's go ahead and begin.
A Virginia jury's decision to side with Johnny Depp in his defamation lawsuit is drawing both condemnation and praise. The verdict came after 6 weeks of very dramatic testimony from both sides. She claimed that he abused her, while he said she was the abuser. In his reaction, Depp wrote, "The goal of bringing the case was to reveal the truth, and that truth never perishes." Elaine Charlson-Bredehoff is the attorney for Amber Heard and is with us now. And we should mention, we did also reach out to Johnny Depp's team, but they declined to be interviewed this morning. Elaine, thank you. We're so very glad you're here.
Interesting. So right there, we did reach out to Johnny Depp's team. They declined to be with us. Elaine does a little bit of a head nod and affirmation, and then a little bit of contempt and disgust seeps into her expression there on the side of her face, letting us know that she feels morally aloof and also a little bit disgusted by the fact that Depp's team did not choose to show up that day. So that's just letting us know the attitude that we're going into this. Already we're establishing this moral aloofness and high ground. We expect that somewhat in any sort of interview like this, but it is seeping out on their subconscious levels already. So let's go ahead and begin.
Glad you're here.
Thank you.
We heard Amber's reaction to the verdict yesterday. This seems to be a huge victory for Johnny Depp this morning.
Yeah, a major setback for women, for women inside the courtroom and outside the courtroom.
Because?
Because basically what this said, you know, Amber had an enormous amount of evidence, although a lot of it was suppressed in this case as opposed to the UK. But look at all the women who have no evidence, all these women who suffer from domestic violence.
I want to go ahead and point out something here that's unfortunate. So this case is difficult, obviously, to say the least. And so in this instance, it's very difficult for me that right off the bat, what Elaine does is instead of saying this is Johnny Depp versus
Amber Heard. This is Johnny Depp's team versus Amber Heard's team. This is lawyer versus lawyer. They immediately painted out to be this is Johnny Depp against the entirety of women. And while that is partially true, it is a subtle move there as well to make it to where no longer are people for Johnny Depp or for Amber Heard. It's now you're either for Johnny Depp or you're for women. And that's not what the case was about. So that's a little bit unfortunate there, but it is still true. This all in all made this extremely difficult and probably brought a lot of attention to these sorts of cases because of what they're about to bring up here as far as evidence goes. So let's watch.
Violence, domestic abuse, they don't have evidence. And basically what this jury said is unless you pull out your cell phone and you tape record your spouse beating you, you're out of luck.
But Elaine, I think it was bigger than that because you had the evidence, as you say, but they did.
Okay, so with that, that is true. The evidence is difficult. You need to have that evidence. Otherwise, it's a he said, she said, or a they said situation. And with that being the case, things like this channel are helpful, but since there are still many avenues that need to be explored along with the nonverbal to be able to get a solid verdict on anything, then it's still limiting. And so in this, it's true, it's hard to make a verdict without having the evidence, but it's hard to collect that sort of evidence. Now, what is interesting non-verbally speaking is while Elaine is doing that, if you watch the feet of the people around the table, they all start to fidget and shift a bit when they're bringing that part up. And that is an indicator of agitation. Anytime that you see that sudden burst in movement, they're processing psychologically, something's happening there. And obviously the interviewer kind of cuts in a little bit and asks or challenges with this other opinion side of things. So we're seeing this come out here. It does not seem as though the people in that room are in support of the Heard side of the trial, but let's continue watching.
They did not believe her. Why do you think they did not believe her?
I think that a lot of that was that it was Johnny Depp. I think the celebrity status.
But she's a celebrity too.
And it's not only not
but she's
believing her.
yeah, but she's a celebrity too.
Right.
But you have to remember, it's a tale of two trials. All the evidence came in the UK. Mr. Depp brought that one. The burden.
Okay, so they asked, but they didn't believe her. Why is she not believable? And Elaine says it's Johnny Depp's fault that Amber Heard's not believable. Which, understandable, Johnny Depp is a larger name in the business, but Amber Heard still does have that following as well. So that's not actually a valid reason as to why people didn't believe Amber Heard. The reason that people didn't believe Amber Heard was because of the desynchronization, because of the fallacies in her storylines, because of the incongruencies as well. So those are the things that really pushed people to not believe Amber Heard. It wasn't Johnny Depp. So there really is a lot of nuance to this case. But let's continue watching.
When the burden of proof was on the son in the UK because they had called him a wife beater and talked about the domestic violence, he had his opportunity to tell the truth then. And a 3-week trial, he lost. The judge found 12 acts of domestic violence, including sexual violence. And that came out November 2, 2020. We weren't allowed to tell the jury that.
Well, it's a different system, and the judge, it wasn't a jury, it was a judge. The judge said it was substantially true, and that is significant, and I think surprised a lot of legal analysts. But, in this case, the jury not only didn't believe Amber Heard, but in ruling that she acted with actual malice, that means she had the intent to cause.
Okay, so we're seeing still some of the disgust towards Johnny Depp through the over-amplified version of the quotations there with the truth and things like that from Elaine. So we're seeing that she does have disgust and contempt in regards to that side. Does make sense. In general, the points that he's bringing up here are solid with the differences between the two systems and that verbiage of substantially true. It wasn't fully true. That verbiage was also quite important. There are some details that go into that. And we're still just noticing that while Elaine's nonverbal communication has stayed largely composed, which we would hopefully expect from somebody who speaks in front of people so often, we're still seeing some of these patternings from both the way that they're directing attention and some of the small micros that are slipping out here and there, helping us understand a little bit better. So let's continue.
To cause harm, right? That's a pretty high standard to have proven.
And it's pretty amazing since the op-ed never even mentioned Mr. Depp. You have to remember that. What they learned from the UK case is to demonize Amber, which is what they did.
So this is interesting. The op-ed did not, in fact, mention Johnny Depp by name. Very true. It just heavily insinuated that it was him, to where you would have to go through a lot of mental gymnastics to assume that it wasn't him. So that argument alone is just like, all right, Elaine, come on. Let's be real. Don't be like, oh, well, we didn't actually even say the name Johnny Depp. You true, very true, but still. So with that alone, that I found these interviews frustrating from Elaine because it did not sound like anybody taking accountability for things that they did poorly or responsibility really in any level. It's just all everybody else's fault and their side was perfect. And that's just simply not the case. Obviously, it's not the case. So let's continue.
And to try to suppress as much of the evidence that came in the UK and did not come in the United States. But the other problem is we had cameras in the courtroom. So here we had, not only did we have a group of Depp fans that were there every day, 100 were allowed in. They lined up at 1 o'clock in the morning for their wristbands to be in that courtroom. But we had everything on camera, and we had tremendous social media that was very much against Amber.
It was pointed out that that was the first time that a victim of sexual abuse had to testify on live television.
And I fought hard and lost that battle. So it should not have happened.
So I am a former.
So with this is true. This was an odd case all the way around, that it was so publicly done. I'm not sure why they insisted on having it so publicly done, but it definitely was. And once again, it did add a lot of complications in there. But as you can hear, Elaine is again blaming everything on Johnny's side of things. Oh, well, now it's the fans' fault. She didn't really explain how it's the fans' fault, but they were there and that obviously made it worse. Regardless, to be able to be compassionate in this situation, that does also make it more difficult, just because if you're testifying about something that is difficult, genuinely, and there is a whole horde of people that don't appreciate you or don't think that you're telling the truth, it is going to be more difficult to be genuine and authentic because you feel attacked already. So there is that possibility that was going in there. Now, this was across multiple different testimonies and multiple different instances throughout time that we've seen these difficulties from Amber Heard come up. So I don't really buy into Elaine's thing of, oh, well, there were a bunch of fans at the trial and that made it look fake. Because then what about the earlier deposition that we analyzed the first video on, where there were no fans and it was still fake and full of incongruencies? But let's go.
Former NFL player. And after a hard loss, it's easy to wake up and point to the other side. Oftentimes, I realized the better thing to do was to look in the mirror. What mistakes did I make as a player? What mistakes did our coaching staff make? And then how can we improve from there? Do you feel like you guys made any mistakes along the way? Do you feel like Amber made a mistake while she was on the stand? Because you're saying it's the celebrity, it's Johnny, it's the people who support him. But what about you and your team?
Well, and that's an excellent question. And to say, and Amber even said on the stand.
There it is. Okay, so with this, now Elaine's being challenged, so she backs up, tucks her chin, pitch goes up, strain enters into her voice, and now she starts stuttering and stammering. This is what happens when you contest what was being said and they start falling apart. So with that in mind, that is still another indicator that they are simply attempting to come out and show that they were 1000% pure, and they're about to admit that they weren't. So now we know they weren't doing perfect, but they are still trying to present as if they were doing perfect, which is manipulation 101. So, still not a fan of what they're doing here, but fascinating to see non-verbally. Let's go.
I am not perfect. I am a human being. These people were giving her death threats. They threatened to microwave her baby. This is the kind of social media she was getting. So are any of us perfect? No. Is there something else we feel we should have done? Yes, absolutely. I redo my closing.
She's really having difficulty here. There's a lot of nose shaking, which we've seen a consistent level of nose shaking, head shaking, left and right throughout this entire interview. And this is actually pretty common in the other ones as well. So since it's so prevalent, then we have to assume that there could be a level of conscious control of that. Now, with that, there is a few psychological processings behind the Americanized version of the no shake, or this specific cultural version
of the left and right head shake. So with this, it could be a no, a negative, not believing in that. Those are usually more micro. If it's a negative with a positive and you see teeny tiny micro head shake no, that might be an indicator of desynchronization. In this area, what it's likely related to is the unbelievable nature of things, or you wouldn't believe it, you would not believe what has been going on, those sorts of things, skepticism, that will all come into that. If there is a statement being said that sounds like it might be questionable, you will oftentimes see that come out. And that could be maybe insecurity, but at very least it is indicating that there is an unbelievable or difficult to believe nature to what's being said. Now, that doesn't mean it's not true. It's just difficult to believe. So we saw that coming all throughout there. Now we have to ask, why is her no shake in there? Since it's so broad, probably not subconscious. So what's the reason for it? Combined with the rest of the nonverbal communication that they're displaying, it does kind of seem more so to be the unbelievable nature of what they're saying and how hard it would be to believe, especially since even they themselves have painted themselves to be perfect, and now they're backtracking and stumbling all over themselves, saying that they obviously aren't, and everybody's human, and the classic excuses from somebody who has just been called out. So we're seeing these pop up, and it's true, everybody's human and everybody makes mistakes, but then why, Elaine, did you insist that everything was Johnny's fault to begin with? That's manipulation and lying. So if it was also your fault, don't try to make it everybody else's fault. Let's continue.
Closings 100 times afterwards, whether I win or lose. That's part of being a good lawyer, a good trial lawyer, is there's always something. But I think that there were a lot of influences here that were beyond our control. And I think the social media, it was like a Roman Colosseum. It is the best way to describe the atmosphere here. And I have to believe that the jury, even though they're told not to go and look at anything, they have weekends, they have families, they have social
they were not
media.
Sequestered. They were not sequestered.
And the 10-day period we had, how could they not have been influenced?
But Elaine, for most people watching this trial, and a lot of people, as you know, got huge views, it just seemed to be so messy and salacious and so tawdry on both sides. And I think a lot of people from the outside looking in thought both of them were not telling the truth, and that they mutually abused each other. Do you not believe that that was the case?
No, and that's one of the many misnomers. The way that Depp's...
I can't handle this one. I can't wrap my head around, in that there is an audio recording of Amber Heard admitting verbally that she struck Johnny Depp. Very hard to ignore that. There is evidence, physical evidence, medical evidence that says otherwise. And so Elaine just really seems to be blowing smoke at this point, to where no, not at all. Amber Heard was pretty much perfect in this. And it's so obviously not true. I don't know how they could so comfortably and quickly say that, which also on that found that interesting. That response before the question was almost even out of the interviewer's mouth was no, well before any consideration had been given. That was an automatic, unthought through response. It's frustrating for me to see, especially in a trial like this, where it's very important that everything has to be weighed very, very heavily and considered. That should not have happened that quickly. It's difficult to see. So let's continue.
Depp's team approached this was based on ignorance of domestic violence. It completely ignored the cycle of violence and just said, oh, she wouldn't have done this if he had been hitting her. That was their approach.
So you thought that they weren't fighting fair?
Correct. I don't think they were fighting fair.
And you think
absolutely.
Amber Heard is, in fact, a survivor of domestic violence?
Yes, I absolutely believe that. And there's a tremendous amount of evidence, much of which did not come into this trial, did come into the UK trial. We even had more evidence. We had medical records. We had mental health records that went back to 2012 that were contemporaneous. We had text messages from Mr. Depp's assistant saying, when I told him that he had kicked you, he cried.
So how is she today, Elaine? How is she today? What is her next move?
So I find that interesting. She's obviously getting agitated. Elaine is, as you can hear her pitch and volume increase in her tone, and then her expressions and gestures are starting to broaden as well. But what I find interesting about the statement that she's giving is that she just said a second ago that Amber was fine, despite me bringing up the points that there were medical records, all of these things showing that it wasn't the case. And now that's the same argument that they're using towards Johnny now. And so why is it not matter if it's Amber's, but it matters if it's Johnny's? And so that's where my frustration is, because frankly, I find it pretty hard to believe that the relationship was all bad from one side. So to try to assume that Amber Heard had done all of the abuse in that relationship is not necessarily true, especially considering what we have seen come out in evidence form from Johnny's behaviors. That being said, it is still a he said, she said, they said situation. And what we're seeing from this side of things is that as far as they're concerned, they want no blame, no scrutiny, no fault at all, regardless of evidence. But they insist that Johnny does. It's just a fascinating ploy. Let's continue.
Right. Well, her next move is appeal. There were
But
a
she's
number.
heartbroken.
She is heartbroken. And one of the first things that she said when she came back from the verdict, when we went into the conference room, was, "I am so sorry to all these women."
She said that?
Yes. She felt like she had let down all of these women because she had more evidence than most people do, and yet they still didn't believe her.
Elaine Charleston, Bretta Hoff, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you.
Thank
We'll be right back.
I don't believe that I'll be doing more on this trial. Maybe if the appeals go through and things continue on from there, there might be. During these interviews, all that we know is that Elaine Bretta Hoff tried very hard to avoid any form of responsibility, regardless of admitting their own faults, still trying to maintain a perfect view of themselves in everybody's eyes, and that simply wasn't the case. I will be getting back to my true crime, reality TV shows, the things that you are used to seeing here on the channel in general, along with some new things as well, but let's go ahead and start.
It's been about more than a week since the verdict. As you sit here with me now, has it sunk in? How could it? It's surreal. And
okay, first I want to note that obviously the resolution of this video is a little bit lower. I could not find the full 1080 version of it. That was also the full interview. And also I was limited by not being able to watch it beforehand. So I hope that this works out okay for everybody involved. Now, with this initial beginning portion here, as the interviewer begins speaking, Amber Heard has a little small smile of contempt creep into her face, and that means that they have moral or intellectual superiority, or the feeling of it in that moment. And that would be in relation to the question being asked, having that almost scorn or disgust, that contempt for that question does make sense contextually. So we are already starting to see some of these normal emotive tells. Let's continue watching.
difficult, in part, yes. This has been a long time coming. Do you stand by?
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and pause again. There is a lot of narrowing of the eyes, a lot of action in the corner of the nose, disgust and scorn. Makes sense contextually as well. In regards to how the trial turned out for Heard, they probably aren't feeling super gung-ho about it currently. So those emotions make sense. So far that has been synchronized, but there hasn't been anything so far to really point any fingers at or even have a question about. So let's continue.
Your testimony and your accusations against Johnny Depp about abuse. Of course, to my dying day, will stand by every word of my testimony. I think vast majority.
So this one, it's interesting. They do have an of course, but it's mixed in with a little bit of a head shake. But that being said, that head shake, that left and right in American culture and some others, it is a no left and right. Since it is a macro move, that means that it's more likely to be consciously done. And if that's the case, it's not likely desynchronization. It's more related to the unbelievable nature, or you wouldn't believe this, but I will do ... I will also say though that in that as well, a little bit of faultiness comes into the tone of her voice, as she has a little less force behind her words. Now, that could be just because of the emotion behind it. Perhaps she's feeling an upwelling of negative emotions that could cause that to maybe choke up a bit. Along with that, though, there's the possibility that it is insecurity or a sign of insincerity into what she's saying. Does not feel what she's saying fully, so it does not present that way tonally as she's speaking it. Let's continue watching and gathering information.
Majority of this trial was played out on social media. I think that this trial is an example of that gone haywire, gone amok. And the jury is not immune to that. You think the jury saw it? How could they not? I think even the most well-intentioned juror, it would have been impossible to avoid this. Every single day I passed for 3, 4, sometimes 6 blocks, city blocks lined with people holding signs saying, "Burn the witch," "Death to Amber." After 3.5 weeks.
Okay, so during this time, they're bringing up this idea of the jury being lilted by the exposure that this case has, which is actually, I think that's a pretty valid point. Like, just having that publicity should certainly make it a little bit more difficult to ensure that the jury was being totally unbiased. That also being said, they were selected to specifically do that. That was their job, and that was their sole purpose throughout this. So any jury can be swayed by another person's opinion. The fact that there was as much publicity as there was, though, does give me a little bit of leeway in that field with Amber. Very true. There are a lot of people that were against her on that. And all of these death threats, things like that, I don't believe that those should be in existence at all. They don't deserve that. And nobody needs to have death threats here. So that's unfortunate. But let's keep watching.
3.5 weeks, I took the stand and saw just a courtroom packed full of Captain Jack Sparrow fans who were vocal, energized. Can you put into words how that felt?
Of Captain Jack Sparrow fans. That's very specific. So Johnny obviously has played a number of roles, but his most prized one is the Jack Sparrow role. But that being said, the people that were showing up to these court hearings were not Jack Sparrow fans. They were fans of Johnny Depp. Now, obviously, Amber Heard is also a public figure, and they have the fan base that goes along with that as well. So this Johnny Depp fandom side of things was also what Amber's lawyer tried to lean on, and it's not as fully applicable as what we would like to be able to have it be, but they are still trying to play that card. So let's continue to see what they do with the rest of this.
This was the most humiliating and horrible thing I've ever been through. I have never felt more removed from my own humanity. I felt less than human.
Let's go back to the day of the verdict. Were you feeling confident?
That's a great question. I wish I could say yes to that. I want to say yes to you, but it wouldn't be true. Even if you think.
So with that, I actually would believe that they were not feeling confident going into the case to begin with. There were a lot of micro movements, no. Even with the initial question itself, there was a small flash of contempt that came into the corner of Amber Heard's mouth there. So that also indicates that moral or intellectual superiority, that level of I know something that you don't. This is, I feel, a little bit dramatized for the sake of the interview, but I do also believe that's synchronized. Now, why that is, I'm not sure. Now, Amber probably is going to say because of the fans or because of something else. They're probably going to hang it on the responsibility of something else, perception, something along those lines. And if we're seeing Amber not take any of the responsibility in this and once again try to blame everybody else, then that is the same thing that their lawyer tried to do as well and not taking any form of accountability for the faults that they had themselves. So let's see how this plays out. I just find that interesting that that is synchronized, that they did not believe that they were going to win, perhaps from the very beginning. And let's find out why.
That I'm lying. You still couldn't tell me, look me in the eye and tell me that you think on social media there's been a fair representation. There was another trial. And
a lot of disgust coming into the side of her mouth here, and that would be in relation to social media, how it has been handled online, and that does make sense, but it makes sense for both parties. It would make sense if she's guilty because it would be very infuriating to have an entire world pointing out that you are lying about things or you are, in fact, being a bad person. But it also does make sense if they were innocent and the world was doing the same thing. So that does make sense, that contempt or that disgust that creeped in there in the corner of their nose. It is synchronized. I would say that's being genuine there. But once again, okay, all right, let's continue.
Dealt with the same substantive issues that had even more evidence in. In fact, my evidence was largely kept out. Really important pieces of evidence kept out. done differently, handled differently by a judge instead of a jury.
Some evidence is admissible in a UK court that is not admissible in a US court. Do you think that maybe he just had better lawyers?
I will say his lawyers did certainly a better job of distracting the jury from the real issues.
For some people,
did a better job at distracting the jury of the real issues. That's fascinating that Amber decided to go with that phrasing of things. Now, along with that, we're seeing a lot of head nodding to go along and enforce with what they're saying, but we're also seeing these very large vocal halts as well. They're weighing their words, they're having difficulty processing in this area, but then Amber says that Depp's lawyers did a better job at trying to distract the jury from what was going on. Which, if you ask me, that does sound an awful lot like Amber Heard just admitted that part of her goal was to distract the jury from what was going on, but maybe just didn't do it as well. So that's not a great thing to say in an interview, to do that. So let's watch.
they just were frankly disgusted by the whole thing and don't have much sympathy for either one of you. Can you understand that?
Absolutely. I would not blame the average person for looking at this and how it's been covered and not think that it is Hollywood brats at their worst. But what people don't understand is it's...
I'm going to go ahead and pause that here. I don't feel like that's actually the opinion here. I don't think anybody's looking at this case, especially what is being dealt with in this case, and looking at it and being like, oh, these are Hollywood brats. While they might be from Hollywood, the issues that they're dealing with are very, very prevalent and very, very real, so nobody's looking at it that way. I find it interesting, again, that Amber's presentation and what she perceives herself as being perceived as is villainous, while it's not for the reasons that they're claiming it is. It's interesting. It's still a subtle form of diverting attention and shrugging blame. Refusing to take any of that accountability and blaming it now on other facets of a person's perception of them, so on and so forth. So let's go.
It's actually so much bigger than that. This is not only about our First Amendment right to speak.
But here's the thing about the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects free speech. It doesn't protect lies that amount to defamation. And that was the issue in the case.
Yes, exactly. You can't go into, the free speech does not protect you if you go into a crowded theater and you scream fire. We get the concept of free speech from...
So Amber's now rewording this, trying to agree with something. The interviewer called her out. No, you lied and were proven to have lied in your defamation. So that's the difficulty here. And Amber's like, yeah, the free speech does not protect lies like that. You're absolutely right. Seeming as though they took in that information, acknowledged that, yeah, perhaps I did do a deceitful thing, but okay, let's shift the blame. Let's try to divert attention. Let's try to figure out a way to get the eyes off of the instance itself. I'm not sure. Let's go.
From the Greeks. My understanding of what that means is not just the freedom to speak. It's a freedom to speak truth to power.
But truth is the word.
Yes.
And that was the issue.
And that's all I spoke.
Ooh, okay. This is fun. Amber pulls out the pointy finger. This is a domination gesture. This is, I'm making a point. Nobody will bring out the pointy finger if they don't feel like they're making a point. So Amber is now trying to take this moral high ground of being like, and that, I just feel about free speech. This is what it is. And she mansplains what free speech is and then says that it's about the truth. And in return, a reciprocal finger comes out from the interviewer. And they're like, oh, but that's the issue, is the truth. And now we're going to hear Amber say that she said nothing but the truth, which we already know is not true. We've seen verbatim, they themselves contradict themselves throughout this trial. So let's just see how they do that. I'm quite curious.
I spoke, and I spoke it to power, and I paid the price.
In the closing arguments, the Depp lawyer called your testimony the performance of a lifetime and said you were acting. What do you say to that?
Says the lawyer for the man who convinced the world he had scissors for fingers.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Amber's response, boiled down, stripped down to the basic level of it, is, well, I wasn't the only one acting. Oh, okay. Wow. That's true. Perhaps. That doesn't, just because somebody else is acting and lying doesn't mean that you can. What? That's not an excuse. That's not even a reason. All right.
I'm the performer. I had listened to weeks of testimony insinuating that, or saying quite directly that, I'm a terrible actress. So I'm a bit confused how I could be both.
The Depp team argued that you were the abuser, that you instigated.
That is a funny point. If they put on a performance of a lifetime for this trial, but they're not a great actor, is it really? Well, I suppose the performance of a lifetime could be lackluster if that's the case, and then nobody technically lied there. But I will also say that I wouldn't consider what they did a performance of a lifetime either. Even in just their presentation themselves, in the areas where we found these red flags, and it was proven that they had been deceitful in these areas, the reasons that we were having issues is because of the general desynchronization that you can see during people showing deceit. Those are the difficulties. So yes, you may have put on the performance of a lifetime, but that doesn't mean that it was convincing whatsoever. And then that also being said, I do believe that there were probably elements of Amber's testimony that were quite true. Even the synchronization from it did seem to lean towards that. And once again, in a relationship, it is a two-way street. So I'm curious to know what other details there might be that I'm not personally privy to, but I do find that interesting. So let's continue.
Instigated physical violence. Did you?
I never had to instigate it. I responded to it. When you're living in violence and it becomes normal, as I testified to, you have to adapt.
You say you were responding, but there is evidence. There are tapes in which you acknowledge hitting. There are tapes in which you say, I started the fight.
I know much has been made of these audio tapes. They were first leaked online after being edited. What you would hear in those clips are not evidence of what was happening. It was evidence of a negotiation of how to talk about that.
I don't necessarily buy into that. It seemed quite straightforward, and for the court to have accepted it as evidence, then obviously it couldn't have been heavily doctored, because then that would have sacrificed the quality or reliability of said evidence. So I doubt that. I highly doubt that it was still kept as admissible evidence if it had been tampered with. So don't buy that. And what I find so interesting is that Amber is now trying to blame the very clear actions of themselves on Johnny as well. So Amber admitted to being an abuser in these tapes, and you can hear it being said, and verified themselves that they said that. And now they're trying to blame that on Johnny. Well, Johnny was abusive, so I was abusive. And I just find that interesting as well. Now, chances are there was likely a little bit of mutual misbehavior here. But Amber Heard is still trying to shift every single ounce of blame onto anybody else. Same thing that her lawyer did, although her lawyer did say that Amber did nothing wrong. And now Amber's saying here that obviously they did something because they said that. So this is still just as messy, even though the courtroom is technically done with this for now. We're still seeing a whole slew of crossed wires and intersecting stories that just don't seem to line up. Let's continue watching.
With your abuser.
But I am looking at a transcript that says, he says, you start physical fights, and you say, I did start a physical fight. I can't promise you I won't get physical again. I mean, this is in black and white. I understand context. But you're testifying and you're just telling me today, I never started a physical fight, and here you are on tape saying you did.
As I testified on the stand about this, is that when your life is at risk, not only will you take the blame for things that you shouldn't take the blame for, but when you're in an abusive dynamic, psychologically, emotionally, and physically, you don't have the resources that, say, you or I do with the luxury of saying, hey, this is black and white, because it's anything but when you're living in it.
But then there are other times, there's another tape where you're taunting him and saying, oh, tell the world, Johnny Depp, I, a man, am a victim of domestic violence.
20-second clips or the transcripts of them are not representative of even the 2 hours or the 3 hours that those clips are excerpt from.
Okay, so during this part, we're seeing that Amber is getting frustrated because the interviewer is not just going right along with what Amber wants to present. Very confrontational from the interviewer, asking the heavy-hitting questions that we would like to see asked. And Amber's frustration and agitation is coming out. We're seeing postural changes come in. We're seeing her break away with her eye contact and preen a little bit as she's getting ready for a new role, which would be a more aggressive role, in that she now is having to confront the interviewer on some level. Along with that, we're able to see a little bit of contempt slip into her face during that full body move as well. And in regards to Amber's response, all that we're hearing is this diversion again. Now, the second part of this is in regards to the context of a conversation. That is actually a really valid point. Hearing the rest of the context of the conversation would be extremely handy. That also being said, I have difficulty finding a way to excuse what she said regardless of the context of the conversation. Not a smooth move there from Amber in my opinion, but let's keep watching.
Could your side have just put the whole 3 hours in then?
I'm not a lawyer. As I testified to, I was talking in those recordings as a person in extreme amount of emotional, psychological, and physical distress.
He says he never hit you.
He
never. Is that a lie?
Yes, it is.
What about the witnesses who said they have seen you instigate physical violence?
I've seen firsthand how people will file rank and support the person they depend on.
Did they all come in and lie in court?
I am not here to call any of his witnesses any names. I'm here to just kind of talk about it from what it felt like for me as a person who sat there.
Now they're having a lot of difficulty because they're finding themselves trapped into this corner of now they're trying to call out other people. They're hanging their responsibility on any singular party. And as this interviewer is slowly shutting down those different avenues of hanging on any singular party, they're having more and more difficulty figuring out a way to come across as a good person in this, largely because it does seem as though they are not a good person in this. Now, in the area where Johnny Depp claims that he never hit Amber Heard, Amber Heard's response was fully synchronized. Now, that would indicate to me that at least in that moment, they do believe what they're saying, or they're presenting it rather well. We know that Amber Heard can be quite desynchronized when under pressure, so seeing that synchronization come out in this area, perhaps. It is still matched with the aggression of the lowered eyebrows and a little bit of the tenseness in the jaw, things like that, but it is synchronized. So I think that's important to note that perhaps there's something that we need to continue to look at in regards to their relationship. There may be more dynamic than what we are aware of. Just from that small blip there, let's continue.
When I asked his lawyers, why do you think you won? And the answer I got was, because she never took responsibility for anything she did in the marriage.
I did do and say horrible, regrettable things throughout my relationship. I behaved in horrible, almost unrecognizable to myself ways. I have so much regret.
A lot of no shaking in here. It's all macro. We can assume that it's all consciously controlled. We're seeing a lot of the disgust, contempt, and scorn come into her face. But we also are now hearing this verbal thing, which is allowing us to have some context as well, where they're trying to clearly draw a line between themselves now and their actions now and their actions then. So now this is a subtle way of them admitting, yeah, I did terrible things before. It's not so subtle. Even here, they just said, yeah, no, I was a terrible human being, did all these terrible things, blah, blah, blah. But that's not who I am now. So you can't really be mad at me about it for then because it's not me now, which that could be fair. People can grow and they can change. It doesn't seem as though that's happened here, but perhaps we're missing something. Let's continue.
Freely and openly and voluntarily talked about what I did. I talked about the horrible language. I talked about being pushed to the extent where I didn't even know the difference between, right and wrong. I will always continue to feel like I was a part of this, like I was the other half of this relationship, because I was. And it was ugly and could be very beautiful. It was very, very toxic. And we were awful to each other. I made a lot of mistakes. A lot of mistakes. But I've always told the truth.
So I'm going to go ahead and stop that there. I'm a little suspicious that that is not the full interview and that it seemed like it just kind of dropped there. So maybe, I don't know. You have to let me know in the comments below. Was this a good look at this interview, this new blind react sort of situation here? If you want me to look at more aspects of it, like send links or comment sections or something like that, so I know which areas you're wanting me to look at. But I find that interesting that at the very end that Amber says that they have always told the truth, and they do the same head movement with that affirmative head nod in, where they come in that they did earlier, where I said that was quite synchronized. Now we know that they don't always tell the truth because they, even in this interview alone, contradicted themselves a few times. And it's showed up in the case. So we know they don't tell the truth, but their synchronization, or at least that head movement there, that was still in line with I always tell the truth. It would have been considered synchronized, so that means that we have to still consider that other step, that other tell, the other instance in context with this one. Perhaps that wasn't synchronization, could be a conscious and intentional move from a trained on-screen talent. Perhaps. So these are all things that we were able to pick up on this, that Amber Heard is still going to try to hang responsibility on anybody or anything else, that the team of Amber Heard did nothing wrong at all. It was everybody else's fault, even down to the fans of Johnny Depp somehow had, it was their fault too. Let me know if you want me to continue covering this case.